Boss fired me after hospital stay for missing work. What happened next made him beg me to return Section 1. I didn't expect the worst week of my life to end with a termination email. It started with chest pain. Not the dramatic movie kind. Just a tightness that wouldn't go away. I figured it was stress. I'd been pulling 12-hour shifts for months, covering for 2 vacant positions, training new hires, fixing mistakes that weren't mine. I told myself I'd rest over the weekend. I never made it to the weekend. By Thursday morning, I was on a hospital gurney staring at fluorescent ceiling lights while a nurse adjusted wires stuck to my chest. "Try to relax," she said gently. Relax. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was my manager, Derek. I let it go to voicemail. I figured I'd call him once I knew what was happening. An hour later, I was admitted for observation. The doctor said they needed to monitor me overnight. Possible cardiac inflammation. Severe stress response. They weren't ruling anything out. I texted Derek from the hospital bed. "Hey, I'm in the ER. Being admitted overnight. I'll keep you posted." 3 dots appeared almost instantly. "Are you serious right now?" I blinked at the screen. "Yes. I'm in the hospital." A minute passed. "Who's covering your client reports?" That was it. "No, are you okay?" "No, take care." "No, let me know if you need anything." Just reports. I stared at the 4 in my arm and felt something inside me shift. For context, I was the senior operations coordinator at a mid-sized logistics company. Translation? I made sure everything ran smoothly so Derek could look competent in meetings. I handled vendor contracts, supply chain timelines, client escalation calls, and internal scheduling. If something broke, I fixed it. Quietly. Over the last year, we'd lost 2 team members and never replaced them. Their workload didn't disappear. It landed on my desk, and I handled it. Late nights, skipped lunches, working through migraines, logging in on weekends, because that's what team players do. Apparently, team players also don't get sick. That night in the hospital, my phone buzzed again. Email notification. Subject line: attendance concern. I opened it. Your recent absence without prior approval raises concerns regarding reliability and team impact. We need to discuss expectations immediately. I reread it twice. Without prior approval. I was hooked to a heart monitor. I typed back slowly. I notified you as soon as I was admitted. This was not planned. No response. The next morning, the cardiologist confirmed it wasn't a heart attack. Severe stress, inflammation, dangerously elevated blood pressure. They prescribed medication and ordered strict rest. 2 weeks minimum, he said firmly. No work. I almost laughed. 2 weeks? I could already hear Derek's voice in my head. I emailed HR and attached the hospital admission paperwork along with the doctor's note. Clear. Official. Documented. Then I turned my phone off. For the first time in years, I let the world spin without me managing it. When I turned it back on 2 days later, there were 17 missed calls. 8 from Derek. 3 from HR. Several from coworkers. My stomach tightened. There was a final email timestamped 9:14 a.m. Subject: employment status update. I opened it. Due to your failure to maintain communication and your ongoing absence, we are terminating your employment effective immediately. Failure to maintain communication. I had sent hospital documents. I had provided medical proof. I had been admitted for heart-related issues. And they fired me. No meeting. No phone call. No discussion. Just a corporate paragraph and instructions to return my laptop. I felt nothing at first. Not anger. Not panic. Just stillness. Then my phone rang again. It was Mia from accounting. I answered. Please tell me you're not actually fired, she said. I got the email, I replied. There was a pause. You know you're the only one who knows how the vendor transition file works, right? I closed my eyes. And the Q4 contracts. And the escalation protocol. And the logistics dashboard passwords. Another pause. Oh. I sat up slowly in the hospital bed. What's happening? I asked. Mia lowered her voice. Everything. Apparently, the moment my access was cut, chaos started. Client calls weren't being returned. Shipments were delayed. Internal approvals were frozen because no one knew the workflow. Derek had tried to access my shared folders.
Locked.
I had organized everything carefully, but certain authorizations required my credentials. Credentials that were now deactivated. Derek's been yelling all morning, she whispered. He thought you were bluffing about how much you handled. I almost laughed. Bluffing? I never bragged about what I did. I just did it. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd fired the one person holding everything together. And they did it while I was in a hospital bed. Mia exhaled slowly. He keeps saying you're replaceable. I stared at the white hospital wall. Am I? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Because somewhere in a fluorescent-lit office, Derek was starting to realize something. You can fire a person. You can't fire the knowledge they carry. And when that knowledge walks out the door, it takes stability with it. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. But for the first time in years, the pressure wasn't on me. It was on him. And I had a feeling this story wasn't over. Not even close. By Monday morning, I was officially unemployed.
Technically.
Reality? The company was already unraveling. I found out because my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. First it was Mia again. Then Carlos from logistics. Then even Jenna from HR, which was ironic considering HR had just signed off on firing me. I let the calls pile up for an hour before answering. It was Carlos. Okay, he said without greeting. What did you do? I got hospitalized, I replied. No, before that. Worked? He sighed. Everything's frozen. Apparently, 3 major shipments hadn't cleared because vendor approvals required a secondary authorization mine. Derek didn't even know that step existed. He'd been forwarding angry client emails to a generic support inbox. One of those clients represented nearly 30% of quarterly revenue. By noon, that client had escalated to the executive level. And that's when things started getting interesting. Around 1:17 p.m., I received an email. Not from Derek.
From the COO.
Subject: quick clarification. That alone told me something was wrong internally. Executives don't email coordinators unless something's burning. The message was short. Can you confirm where the final Q4 vendor transition documentation is stored? We are having difficulty accessing the necessary materials. I stared at the screen. Having difficulty. Translation: we can't find it, and everything's on fire. I typed back carefully. My access was revoked effective Friday morning. I no longer have system access. 2 minutes later, my phone rang. Private number. I let it ring once.
Twice.
Then answered. This is Mark, the voice said.
Calm.
Controlled. Executive level calm. Yes. We're experiencing some disruption, he continued. I understand you were managing several operational workflows? Several. That was generous. I handled vendor contracts, transition scheduling, client escalations, approval routing, and reporting dashboards, I said evenly. There was silence on the other end. Then, right. I could practically hear him, realizing the scope. I was informed your absence was uncommunicated, he said carefully. I kept my voice steady. I emailed my manager from the emergency room. I provided hospital documentation to HR. I was under doctor's orders. More silence. Different silence this time. Not confusion. Assessment. I see, he finally said. We both knew what that meant. Someone had misrepresented the situation. And now operations were choking because of it. I'll need to look into this, he added. Of course. We hung up. 10 minutes later, Mia texted me. He just pulled Derek into a closed-door meeting. I leaned back against my couch, heart still not fully steady, but suddenly lighter. For years, I'd absorbed pressure quietly. Now the pressure had nowhere to go, except upward. By 3 p.m., word had spread internally that a major client was threatening to pause their contract due to delays and miscommunication. That contract alone funded half the department's payroll, including Derek's bonus. At 4:12 p.m., I received another email. This one from HR. Subject: severance clarification. They were offering 2 weeks' pay as goodwill.
Goodwill.
after firing me during a medical emergency. I didn't respond. Instead, I checked something I hadn't thought about until that moment. My email archive. Every late-night message. Every documented approval. Every time Derek told me to just handle it. Every timestamp proving I had informed him about the hospital. I hadn't deleted anything. I never did. Documentation wasn't paranoia. It was protection. By 5 p.m., the call stopped. The silence felt different this time. Not peaceful.
Tense.
Then at 6:03 p.m., my phone rang again.
Derek.
I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. And again. On the fourth attempt, I answered. His voice didn't sound like it usually did. No sharp edge. No authority. Just strain. "Why didn't you tell anyone how much you were managing?" he demanded. I almost laughed. I did. "You never said we'd be completely stuck without you." "That wasn't my job," I replied calmly. "My job was to keep things running." There was breathing on the other end.
Heavy.
Frustrated. "You left us in a bad position." I sat up straighter. "No," I said evenly. "You fired me." Silence. Real silence. Not the kind filled with ego. The kind filled with realization. A client had already escalated to the executive board. Shipments were stalled. Vendor penalties were stacking by the hour. And the person who knew how to untangle it was sitting at home under doctor's orders. Unemployed. "I need you to explain the workflow," Derek finally said. "I don't work there anymore." "You could at least send instructions." "Through which system?" "The one you revoked." He didn't answer. Because there wasn't one. For the first time since I joined that company, I wasn't absorbing the chaos. I was watching it. And watching it taught me something important. They hadn't valued me. They'd relied on me. There's a difference. Reliance feels like importance. Until they think they can replace you.
Until the day they try.
"Look," Derek said, voice lower now. "This is becoming a serious issue." I stared out the window at the quiet street. "It already was," I replied. We both knew this wasn't over. Not with clients threatening to walk. Not with executives asking questions. Not with documentation sitting safely in my inbox. He ended the call without another word. But something had shifted. Because this time, when my phone went quiet, it wasn't because I was powerless. It was because they were. Tuesday morning, the tone changed. No more frantic coworkers. No more vague executive emails. This time it was direct. Subject: request for meeting. From Mark, COO. Not Derek. Not HR.
The so.
I let the email sit for a full 5 minutes before opening it. Not because I was unsure, but because for once I could take my time. We would appreciate the opportunity to discuss the current operational disruptions and clarify recent events. Please let us know your availability. Clarify recent events. Corporate language for something went wrong, and we're trying to figure out who's responsible. I replied with a simple message. I am currently on medical leave per doctor's orders. I can accommodate a brief call tomorrow at 11 a.m. Not today. Tomorrow. Let them feel one more full day of instability. By noon, Mia texted me again. Client officially paused new shipments. That was fast. Apparently, the 30% revenue client had grown tired of missed deadlines and unclear communication. Without my escalation routing, their concerns bounced between departments like a lost package. Derek tried to step in. But Derek didn't know the history. Didn't know which vendor had tension with which supplier. Didn't know the workaround for the outdated tracking system. Didn't know that the Q4 pricing adjustment hadn't been finalized yet, and sending the wrong numbers would trigger penalty clauses. Because I handled those. Quietly. By 3 p.m., I heard something even more interesting. HR had reopened my termination file. That meant one thing. Damage control. Wednesday came. 11 a.m. Right on time, my phone rang. Mark's voice was calm again, but less confident. "Thank you for taking the call," he began. There was someone else on the line, too. HR director. "Of course. We're trying to understand the workflow dependencies tied to your role," Mark continued. Dependencies. Another corporate word. Meaning, we didn't realize everything depended on you. I spoke clearly. My role evolved over time due to staffing reductions. I absorbed responsibilities to prevent client disruption. HR jumped in. Were those responsibilities formally assigned? No, I said. They were necessary. Silence. They were starting to see the liability. Because if my job description didn't match my workload, and I'd been terminated during a medical emergency, the legal exposure wasn't small. Mark shifted gears. There appears to have been a breakdown in communication regarding your hospitalization. That was generous phrasing. I emailed Derek from the emergency room. I replied. I attached medical documentation to HR the following morning. Papers shuffled on their end. The HR director cleared her throat. We're reviewing internal communication records.
Good.
Because I had them too. Mark exhaled slowly. The client escalation yesterday was significant. We are currently negotiating to prevent contract cancellation. There it was. The real reason for the call. Not concern. Not fairness. Money. I'm sorry to hear that, I said calmly. Another pause. Then it came. Would you be willing, Mark said carefully, to provide a transition briefing? As a contractor. Contractor. Interesting. That meant they were already adjusting their posture. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I asked a question. What exactly is Derek telling you about my termination? The line went quiet. Too quiet. Finally, Mark spoke. He indicated that communication was inconsistent and that your absence was unapproved. I almost smiled. I have time-stamped emails and hospital documentation, I said, including his response asking about client reports while I was admitted. No one spoke, because now it wasn't just operational chaos. It was credibility. And credibility matters at executive level. HR shifted again. We're assessing whether the termination process aligned with company policy. Translation. It probably didn't. I let them sit with that. Then Mark asked the real question. If we were to discuss reinstatement, would you consider returning? There it was. Not contractor. Not briefing. Returning. I leaned back slowly. 3 days ago, I was disposable. Now I was essential. What would that look like? I asked. We would reinstate your position immediately. Full pay. Retroactive compensation for lost days.
I didn't respond.
He continued. And we would restructure operational support so that responsibilities are distributed appropriately. Distributed. Meaning, they finally realized stacking everything on one person is a risk. Additionally, HR added quickly, we would like to resolve any concerns you may have regarding how this was handled. Concerns. That word barely covered it. I thought about the hospital bed, the heart monitor, the termination email, the word reliability. Then I thought about the stalled shipments, the client threatening to walk, the executive level panic. Power shifts are quiet. You don't feel them physically, but you know when they happen. Because the people who dismissed you start choosing their words very carefully. I will consider it, I said evenly. But any discussion would need to include written role clarification, staffing support, and medical leave protection. Another pause. Of course, Mark replied quickly. Of course. Funny how that phrase appears when leverage changes sides. After the call ended, Mia texted me almost instantly. Did they ask you to come back? Yes. 3 dots appeared. Derek looks like he hasn't slept. I didn't feel joy. I felt vindication. Not because they needed me, but because the truth had surfaced. I wasn't unreliable. I was overextended. I wasn't absent without notice. I was hospitalized. And they hadn't fired an employee. They'd exposed their own incompetence. The question now wasn't whether they wanted me back. It was whether I wanted them. And that was a very different position to be in. By Thursday morning, the tone had shifted from urgent to desperate. The major client hadn't officially canceled, but they had frozen expansion. That meant no new contracts, no additional revenue. And internally, that translated to executive heat. I received a calendar invite at 9:02 a.m. Subject: Reinstatement discussion. Attendees: Mark, COO. HR Director.
Derek.
Interesting. Derek hadn't been on the last call. This time, he would be. The meeting started promptly at 10. Mark opened it. We've reviewed the internal communication logs. That was corporate 4. We saw the emails. HR followed up. It appears you notified your manager immediately upon hospital admission and provided documentation in accordance with policy. Appears. I let that word pass. Derek hadn't spoken yet. I waited. Finally, Mark turned to him. Derek, do you want to address the earlier representation? There was a pause long enough to feel. I misunderstood the severity of the situation, Derek said stiffly. And there were concerns about workflow visibility. Misunderstood the severity. I was in cardiac monitoring, but I kept my voice steady. Workflow visibility was limited because responsibilities expanded without formal documentation. I requested staffing support 3 times in the last 6 months. Silence. Because that part was true too. 3 separate emails asking for help. Each met with, "Let's revisit next quarter." Next quarter had arrived. And so had consequences. Mark cleared his throat. The immediate issue is stabilization, he said. We need operations normalized before the client escalates further. There it was again.
Need.
Not preference.
Need.
HR leaned forward slightly. We are prepared to offer full reinstatement effective immediately, back pay for missed days, and a written amendment clarifying scope of responsibility. I didn't respond yet, because this wasn't just about getting my job back. This was about not walking back into the same trap. I would require 3 conditions, I said calmly. I heard Derek shift in his chair. First, I continued, formal redistribution of vendor transition oversight to at least 1 additional trained employee. Mark nodded immediately. Second, protected medical leave assurance in writing. HR nodded as well. Third, I added, salary adjustment reflecting the actual scope of my responsibilities over the past year. That's when Derek finally reacted. That's not really the focus right now. Mark cut him off. It is. Silence. Because executives understand something managers sometimes forget. If one person's departure destabilizes the company, that person wasn't being paid correctly. Mark asked, "What adjustment are you proposing?" I named a number. Not outrageous, but significant. Derek inhaled sharply. HR typed something. Mark didn't react immediately. Instead, he asked a question. If we meet these terms, are you prepared to resume operations immediately? There it was. The urgency again. I let the silence stretch. Then I said, upon written confirmation. The call ended 14 minutes later.
Short.
Efficient. Different from the chaos earlier in the week. An hour passed. Then 2. At 1:47 p.m., an email arrived. Offer letter amendment attached. They met every condition. Every one. Salary adjusted upward. Back pay included. Medical leave protection outlined. Additional staff training plan detailed. And Derek? Removed as sole oversight authority on my department. That was subtle, but deliberate. Mia called me 5 minutes later. Is it true? Yes. You're coming back? Yes. She exhaled audibly. You have no idea how tense it's been. Oh, I did. Because tension reveals truth. Derek's authority had quietly fractured. Executives had stepped in directly. And HR was now documenting everything carefully. I returned the signed agreement at 2:10 p.m. At 2:22 p.m., my system access was restored. At 2:23 p.m., my inbox flooded. 37 unread messages. I didn't open them immediately. Instead, I sat still for a moment. 3 days ago, I was unreliable. Now I was essential. But here's the difference. I wasn't coming back as the same employee. I was coming back with leverage and documentation. When I logged into the operations dashboard, the damage was obvious. Delayed approvals, pending escalations, vendor confusion. It took me 15 minutes to untangle the first knot, 30 to stabilize client communication. By the end of the day, the major client agreed to resume shipments. Not because Derek reassured them, because I called them directly. I knew their concerns, their history, their pressure points. You can't replace relationship knowledge with a title. At 5:48 p.m., Derek knocked on my office door. He didn't come in immediately. He waited. Different energy now. "Glad to have you back," he said. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't sharp either. "Glad to be properly staffed," I replied evenly. He nodded once. No argument, because the hierarchy had shifted. Not publicly, not dramatically, but permanently. And as I shut down my computer that evening, one thought settled clearly in my mind. They didn't beg because they cared. They begged because the system broke without me.
And now,
The system was built differently, so it wouldn't break again. At least, not on my watch. The first week back felt different. Not tense, not awkward, calculated. People moved more carefully around me. Emails were clearer. Requests were documented. Deadlines were shared instead of silently transferred to my plate. It wasn't kindness. It was awareness. When a company almost loses a major client in 72 hours, lessons stick. By Monday, the executive team had scheduled a department-wide restructuring meeting. Not led by Derek. Led by Mark. That alone told everyone what they needed to know. We sat in the conference room, operations, logistics, finance. Mark didn't waste time. Over-reliance on a single individual created operational risk, he began. That ends now. No one looked at me directly, but everyone knew. He outlined the new structure. Vendor transition responsibilities split across 2 managers. Escalation workflow documented and shared. Dashboard access expanded. Mandatory cross-training implemented. Then came the line that shifted everything publicly. We also recognized that workload expansion must be reflected in compensation and role clarity. That wasn't for me. That was for the room. A warning and a correction. After the meeting, something unexpected happened. Carlos approached me quietly. "I didn't realize how much you were shielding us from," he said. Shielding. That word hit differently. Because that's what it had been. I wasn't just working hard. I was absorbing chaos, so others didn't feel it. And when that shield disappeared, everything cracked. Derek kept his distance that week. Professional. Reserved. Less commanding. I later learned his bonus had been significantly reduced due to the client incident. Not publicly announced, but internally understood. Accountability doesn't always come loudly. Sometimes it shows up in performance reviews. By Friday, operations had stabilized. The client renewed their expansion discussion. Vendors were aligned. The team was functioning not because I carried everything again, but because I didn't. That was the difference. The second week back, HR scheduled a wellness follow-up. The tone was careful, measured. "We want to ensure you feel supported," the director said. I nodded politely. Support would have been nice before the termination email. But I didn't say that. Because revenge wasn't the point. Balance was. And I had it now. One afternoon, Derek stopped by again. This time, he stepped fully inside. "I misjudged the situation," he said plainly. No corporate phrasing. No qualifiers. Just that. I held his gaze. "Yes," I replied. He didn't argue. Didn't defend. Didn't shift blame. That alone told me the power dynamic had reset. "I shouldn't have acted that quickly," he added. That was as close to an apology as he was capable of. "I won't be available like that again," I said calmly. He frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean 12-hour days, weekend coverage, absorbing vacant roles. That version of me is retired." He studied me for a moment, then nodded once. Understood. And that was it. Because here's what people don't talk about. When you prove your value by breaking yourself for a company, they don't respect you more. They rely on you more. The respect only came after I was gone. After they felt the absence. After they saw the numbers dip. After executives got involved. I didn't win because I came back. I won because the terms changed. 3 weeks after my reinstatement, I received an official performance review addendum. Critical to operational stability. Demonstrated leadership under pressure. Integral to client retention. Funny. A month earlier, I was unreliable. That's how fragile corporate narratives are. They shift depending on convenience. But documentation? Documentation doesn't shift. The hospital records existed. The emails existed. The timeline existed. And that's what protected me. Looking back, the chaos wasn't caused by my absence. It was caused by arrogance. The assumption that no one person matters that much. Until they do. If there's one thing I learned, it's this. You are replaceable until the day you aren't. And the moment a company realizes that, they don't just call. They negotiate. He fired me while I was in a hospital bed. 3 days later, he was asking what it would take to bring me back. Not because he cared. Not because he felt guilty. But because the system collapsed. And when something collapses, the person who knows how to rebuild it holds the power. This time, I made sure that power came with protection. And a raise.